Our first declaimer this evening pairs together two different passages from C.S. Lewis in order to explore what it means to become truly human. In the first passage from Mere Christianity, Lewis compares growth in the spiritual life to a statue coming alive, which then our declaimer paired with a passage from the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, in which Aslan rescues those who the White Witch has turned into stone. Please welcome Senior Durham Pelinka for tonight's opening recitation.
A statue has the shape of a man, but it is not alive. And in the same way, man has the shape or likeness of God, but he does not have the same kind of life that God has. Let us take the first point first. Everything that God has made bears some likeness to himself. Space is like him in its hugeness. And that does not mean that the greatness of space and the greatness of God are the same kind of greatness, but rather it is a symbol of it, or a translation of it into non-spiritual terms. Matter is like God because it has energy, though, again, of course, physical energy is very different than the power that we find in God. The vegetable world is like him because it is alive, and he is the living God, but life, in this biological sense, is very different than the life we find in him. It is more of a shadow of it. When we come to the animals, we find different kinds of representation. In the higher mammals, we see the beginnings of instinctive affection, but that is very different than the love we find in God. Rather, it is like how a picture that is drawn on a flat piece of paper can nevertheless become like a landscape. And when we come to man, the highest of all animals, we see the most complete resemblance to God of which we know of. Man not only lives, but loves and reasons, and biological life reaches its highest known level through him. But what man in his natural condition has not got is spiritual life, the higher and different kind that is only found through God. We use the same word life for both, but if you thought that both must therefore mean the same thing, then that would be like thinking that the greatness of space and the greatness of God are the same kind of greatness. When in reality, the difference between the two is so important that I'm going to give them two distinct names. The biological sort, which comes to us through nature and which is always tending to run down and decay, is bios. And the spiritual sort, which is in God from all eternity and from which the entire natural universe was created, is zoe. Bios, to be sure, has a certain shadowy or symbolic resemblance to zoe, but only to the extent that a photo does to a place or a statue does to a man. And that is why for a man to change from having bios to having zoe, he would have undergone as great a change as a statue would, from being carved of stone to being a living, breathing man. And that is precisely what Christianity is all about. The world is a great sculptor's shop. We are the statues. And there's a rumor going around the shop that someday, some of us are going to come to life. What an extraordinary place, cried Lucy. All of these stone animals and people too. It's like a museum. Hush, said Susan. Aslan's doing something. And he was indeed. He had just bounded up to the stone lion and breathed on him. And then, without waiting a moment, he whisked round, almost as if he had been a cat chasing its own tail, and breathed also on the stone dwarf, which, as you remember, was standing a few feet from the lion with his back to it. Then he pounced on a tall stone dryad, turned rapidly aside to deal with the stone rabbit at its right, and rushed on to two centaurs. But at this moment, Lucy cried out, "Oh, Susan, look at the lion." Now, I'd expect you've seen someone put a lighted match to a bit of newspaper, which is propped up in a grate against an unlit fire. And for a second, nothing seems to happen. But then, you notice a tiny streak of flame that is creeping across the edge of the paper. It was just like this. For a second after Aslan had breathed upon him, the stone lion seemed just the same. But then, A tiny streak of gold began to run across the lion's white marble back. Then it spread. Then the color seemed to lick all over him, just as the flame licks all over the bit of paper. And then, although his hindquarters were obviously still stone, the lion shook his mane and the heavy stone folds rippled into living hair. And then, having caught sight of Aslan, the lion went bounding after him and frisked around him, whimpering with joy and jumping up to lick his face. Of course, the children's eyes turned to follow the lion. But the sight they saw was so wonderful, they soon forgot about him. Everywhere, statues were coming to life. Creatures were running after Aslan and dancing around him till he was almost hidden in the crowd. Instead of all that deadly white, the courtyard was now a blaze of color. And instead of all that deadly silence, the whole place rang with happy roarings, brayings, shouts, songs, yelps, and laughter. At last, the ransacking of the witch's fortress had ended. The whole castle stood empty, every door and window open, allowing for the light and the fresh spring air to come flooding into all the dark and evil places that so desperately needed it. The whole crowd of liberated statues surged back into the courtyard.